I'd like to thank each of you for your commitment and hard work over the many months. We in St. Vrain continue to deliver an environment that was world class, that gave our students a competitive advantage. And I appreciate each of you so much. Indeed, you are an inspiration to all of us. Our objectives in this training is to give you an understanding of the best practices with blended learning and synchronous learning, and also to learn about the tools that our Department of Technology Services is giving to each of our teachers. And in this way, you'll be better prepared for the start of school. To structure the logistics of both a asynchronous and synchronous environment, meaning when students are in person and then they're at home, an instructional framework is really needed for that. We know that structure and repetition is one of the best things that we can give to our students so that they are not confused and they can keep moving forward. And we can really get that idea of that innovation and foundation piece down. In the coming segments, you're going to hear from some of the best and brightest of your colleagues about this instructional framework. And this is really about giving you structure to plan your elements. Then you'll be able to bring in your professionalism, your trade craft, and really make this come alive for your students. Please do not hesitate to call me at any time or email me if I can be of any service to you. Again, we so deeply appreciate everything that you're doing for our students. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy the training.
Hi, I'm Julie Reed. I've been a proud member of the St. Vrain Valley School District for the last 20 years. First as a Spanish teacher, then as a learning technology coach, and now as a learning technology support specialist. The goal of this portion of our training today is to introduce some additional tools that will be at your disposal this school year and to give you some best practices and think-abouts when using technology to support learning in a variety of ways this year. In addition to the iPad and MacBook Air that all teachers have, we'll be providing each classroom a Just Stand, a wide-angle lens, and a wireless microphone kit. In selecting these tools, our goal was to provide multiple options to support both synchronous and asynchronous instructional practices. The Just Stand can be used as a tripod for your iPad, meaning it can be used as a tripod to record or stream video content. It can also be used as a document camera in your classroom. Do be sure when using the Just Stand that your iPad is tucked securely in, and if you notice, I folded the back of my iPad case so that the camera is exposed and that the iPad is snugly in the Just Stand. The Just Stand also provides 2 USB ports for charging. You'll want to make sure that you charge the components of your kit every night after use. The Just Stand itself can be plugged into power or can be standalone so that it's portable around your classroom for a variety of uses and setups. The wide-angle lens that we've provided can be attached to any of the 3 cameras between your laptop, your iPad, on the back of your iPad, or the front of your iPad. Though we do find that the best configuration for the wide-angle lens is on the front iPad camera. It simply clips on to the front of the camera, centered over the camera area, and it's really amazing how much wider of a picture you can get using that clip-on wide-angle lens. This can allow your virtual students or your recording to cover the entire front of your classroom, all your whiteboards, your document camera screen, or any slide presentation you might show. The wireless microphone kit comes with either an around-the-neck microphone you can wear kind of like a necklace, or a lavalier microphone that you can clip on and attach to a belt. The most important piece with that wireless microphone kit is this splitter. And the splitter will allow you to connect both your wireless microphone and, if you choose, you can connect your room audio system so that your in-class participants can hear your distance participants. It is important to note that these microphones are directional, and the purpose of these is to focus the sound on the teacher's voice. That means that your distance participants will need you to either paraphrase or repeat any questions or classroom discussion happening in the room so that they can hear it from their connection through WebEx. When deciding how to set up your classroom for success, you may want to consider the following questions. What parts of your day or your lesson are appropriate to be in a synchronous environment? Remember that we want to be selective as to what portions of instruction and how much overall time our students spend in a synchronous environment. More details are provided in the Structures and Tools for Synchronous Learning document that will be attached with this training and that all teachers will have access to. Another question is, how are you and all of your students going to access the daily information that you need to access for instruction? And what do you want participants in class and remotely to be able to hear and to be able to see? Let's look at one common setup that we might be using throughout this school year. And that is that I have some students who are in class and some students who are connected virtually, and I'd like to be able to do some direct instruction or presentation to both groups at the same time. What I've done here is I've connected my laptop to the room system as I normally would to show a slideshow or a presentation. And I have the Just stand with the iPad pointed up and pointed at the board and the screen so that my remote students can see the presentation, see anything that I write on the board, and see and hear me giving the direct instruction. I have the wireless microphone kit connected and set up to a lavalier microphone so that my voice is focused. And I chose to put on the wide angle lens so that my remote students can see the entirety of the board in the front of the room. Reminder, the audio splitter and the wireless mic needs to be connected to whatever device is connected to your WebEx for your distance participants. Please be aware you can connect more than one device in a room to your personal room, but one of those devices will have to be fully muted in WebEx and have the sound and microphone turned off on the computer to avoid that irritating audio loop that happens when you have more than one device in a room connected to the WebEx. With this setup, one really important consideration is how your participants who are connected virtually will be able to ask questions. One idea is to have a student in the room connected to the Schoology page or to some kind of back channel that you've set up so that your distance participants, if they're old enough to type, can type in some questions and that student can play navigator or kind of monitor of that chat group and ask the questions for your distance participants. If your students aren't old enough to be able to type in their own questions during a direct instruction lesson, you may choose to connect the audio room system to your WebEx meeting and have those students unmute when they have questions at specific times during your lesson. These tools are also really useful should you decide to record some content for your students to post in Seesaw or Schoology for a more asynchronous lesson design. There are lots more ways to connect these tools to customize for what you need to do in your classroom, both synchronously and asynchronously. As you have more questions, we'll have a document, a support document and video on more details for how to connect all the various components and turn everything on, as well as a PDF for ideas reviewing what we've covered today. Reach out to your learning leaders and your building support team as you have questions about how to use this to best navigate teaching and learning this year.
Hi, my name is Temple Hales and I'm an instructional coordinator for our district. Prior to my current role, I taught first and second grade collectively for 10 years and most recently have served as a blended learning facilitator for our blended learning collaborative. So I've been able to work side by side with teachers preschool through 12th grade, implementing blended learning practices into their instruction. Today, I'm going to work with Karen Smith and we're going to walk you through some resources that have been created to help you in your synchronous blended learning instruction in elementary. We're going to go over some tools and structures that we've put together that you can start with. It's a foundation, it's a starting point. So the purpose of these resources is to help connect the tools and structures of blended learning to instructional practice and lesson components for any content area. The document that I will walk you through will focus on many of the structures and tools that can be used for synchronous learning. So let's take a step back and think about this past spring. And let's think about what we learned from our distance learning experience. Let's look first at synchronous learning, meaning that all students were trying to do the same thing at the same time on WebEx. We learned what worked best was small groups that were planned beforehand and mostly intervention focused. We also learned that setting up regular morning meeting times that were focused mostly on community building, and knowing now that we're going to have half of our students in class and then half of our students online, really creating those opportunities to connect and collaborate as a class and build those community structures will be important. We also found class read-alouds on WebEx to be highly entertaining and successful. As far as asynchronous activities that were successful, choice boards that included both online and offline options. So knowing that within a choice board, there were some opportunities for student inquiry and project-based learning that maybe took place offline at home, that was exciting and went over really well. Quality online content and flipped videos coupled with an activity. And then we also found success with online formative assessments. So, take a little bit of time and reflect back on your experience in the spring. Thinking about distance learning or some of your blended learning practices that you implemented, what was successful for you and your students? What made the experience a success? And what do you want to carry forward into this school year? Let's take 3 minutes and just reflect and write. So before I dig into the resources that I'm going to share with you, I want to talk about 3 tools that we have available to us at the elementary level that are high leverage tools for synchronous learning. The first one, many of you are familiar with if you teach preschool through 3rd grade, that's Seesaw. Seesaw is an online digital portfolio that allows student work to live in one place. It is a great way for students to collaborate with one another, for a teacher to communicate with families, as well as teachers can administer formative assessments and online instruction and provide creative and engaging ways for students to showcase their learning. Now, the platform that we have for 4th and 5th grade is Schoology. Schoology is an LMS that is very similar to Seesaw as far as being a one-stop shop. It keeps all of the student work in one place. It allows teachers to post assignments, formative assessments, interactive quizzes, polls. We can set up discussions and discussion boards for students to collaborate with one another. Content is very easily inserted, meaning videos, photos, PDFs, text. It's a direct connection to parents, and it also prepares our students for the 6th through 12 platform and what colleges are using today for many of their online LMS systems. So, the 3rd tool on here that I want to take a quick look at is WebEx. A lot of us used WebEx last year in the spring too. WebEx is an online conferencing tool that allows us to host meetings and deliver instruction virtually. It's just another way to connect my students who are online with my students who are in the classroom. So, let's take a look now at the document. The document that we're going to look at today is it is a compilation of various tools and structures that we can use within our synchronous learning. I want to call out a couple of things that are at the top of the document. The lesson components are in the top in blue. Those lesson components are linked down in the document as a bookmark. So if you want to go directly to the independent practice component of the lesson, just click on that bookmark and it'll take you down there. Just a navigation hint that I wanted you to be aware of. Those same lesson components are found all the way down the left-hand side of the document. On the right-hand column of the document, you're going to see the tools and structures. For elementary, those tools and structures, for the most part, are broken up by K3 and then again by 4-5. Keeping in mind, Seesaw is going to be driving a lot of that decision for K3. Schoology is going to be driving a lot of that for 4-5. Now, it's color-coded, and it's color-coded for a reason. The purple, that indicates tools that we're already doing. They're already happening in our classroom in person. We just wanted to highlight them so that you could see how those might look in an online environment. So anything in yellow are tools or structures that you might want to consider setting up online. Now, the pink section down at the bottom, those are tools that are going to bring the two environments together. It's going to help me to bridge the online learning with the learning in my classroom. So that's an overview of what the document looks like. So I'm going to go step by step, and I'm going to look at the lesson component and then the tools associated with that lesson component. I promise I'm not going to read out every tool on the document. I'm just going to highlight what I think will help you to understand and navigate it on your own. So in the retrieval practice or the anticipatory set of the lesson, that's where we're really thinking about how am I going to hook my students into the lesson in a way that activates that prior learning and it elicits that curiosity. So in person, you're going to see the things that you've always done. Those cooperative learning structures are key for the times that we have our students face-to-face. Fist of 5, ways to gauge body language, right? Graphic organizers, whiteboards, and sticky notes. Online, in the yellow section, you'll see various options that we have that you can do within Seesaw. We can post to the student journal as if we're the sample student, and we could set up an online discussion that way so that students could see one another's responses to that. We could do a sliding scale, any sort of a template or graphic organizer that we do in person, we could do that as well in Seesaw. We also have the option in Seesaw for drawing and voice recorded comments. Now in pink, again, we're bringing those two environments together. We've got Kahoot and Nearpod that we could use. So we're going to look at that same section of the lesson, that same component, but we're going to look at it for grades 4 and 5. So again, in person, you'll see structures that we're already very familiar with. Online, we're bringing in that concept of Schoology. We're thinking about maybe a poll in Schoology or a quick discussion board just to get our curiosity piqued about what we're going to learn. In pink, those are various tools that we have available to create a connection between in-person and online. All right, so now let's talk about tools to support the direct instruction within our K3 grades. Thinking about direct instruction, it's that opportunity to demonstrate knowledge and to model new information. In person, you'll see the structures that we're very familiar with, graphic organizers, cooperative learning structures, read alouds. With synchronous learning, there's a great opportunity here to put my online instruction either into WebEx or pre-record my online instruction and put it into Seesaw for students to watch at their own time at home. Another powerful tool that we can utilize within our direct instruction is a choice board. And we can set that choice board up in Seesaw and then include things like virtual field trips, interactive text. My read aloud that I had could go in that choice board. I could include PDFs or photos. So thinking about choice boards from this point forward within the lesson is pretty powerful in K3. So now, tools that are available for 4-5 are very similar, except we're focusing more on Schoology now. So take a look at in-person. You're going to see things that you're very familiar with read alouds, mini lessons, cooperative learning structures. Online, same things that I just talked about in Seesaw, we're now putting into Schoology and thinking how can we take that online instruction and make it available to students at home. Choice boards again, and We had several teachers last year who taught 4th and 5th grade have a lot of success with putting their direct instruction in a hyperdoc. So in a document where there were other components of the lesson linked within that one document, and then that document was posted into Schoology. All right, let's move on to the next section, which is that check for understanding. And as you know, when we're delivering our direct instruction, there's a lot of fluidity between our direct instruction and then checking for understanding. Sometimes those are kind of happening simultaneously. So feel free for one of the tools to kind of fall over into the other category. They don't always live just in that one cell. We've got options here, again, for the in-person, for the online, and then you'll notice down in the connecting section, in the pink section, we've got ChatterKid that we added because you could smash that into Seesaw as well as Pick Collage as a fun way to check for understanding in grades K through 3. In 4th and 5th grade, many of the similar components that we just talked about in tools as a way to check for that understanding. All right, let's take a break. I asked you earlier to reflect back on what resonated, what was successful with you, either with implementation of blended learning practices or the experience that we had with distance learning. I asked you to write about that. I want you now to take into consideration the tools that we've just explored for direct instruction, for the anticipatory set, direct instruction, and check for understanding, and think about, of the tools that we've talked about and knowing what was successful for you, what are you excited to try in your direct instruction? Take 5 minutes to do a think, pair, share. All right, let's keep going. Let's look now at the next section, which is that guided practice. We broke guided practice up into 2 feedback loops. We started with the teacher to student feedback loop. What we're really trying to be mindful of is what opportunities am I creating to provide immediate feedback directly to my students. I lumped all of those together in K through 5 because I found many of the tools to be similar. So WebEx conferencing could be a great way to provide feedback to my online students. I might have a small group, like we talked about earlier, a small group that I've identified ahead of time that I know need feedback in a particular area. So I have that WebEx conference set up with those students, just as I would in person in the classroom for a small group conference. In yellow, you'll see many of the other online options that we have within Seesaw or Schoology, and then very similar ones that we've already looked at for connecting in-person to online. So the second feedback loop that I mentioned was that student-to-student feedback loop. Here, we're thinking about what opportunities am I providing for students to give feedback to one another. So setting up discussions, both in Schoology and then within Seesaw, it's going to have to be set up as opposed to a student journal, but we could still create a discussion-like environment for our students to provide feedback to one another, as well as looking for opportunities to collaborate within any of our Google Suite apps that we have. Any of those apps that are collaborative would also allow us to take a cooperative learning structure and just make it digital. All right, tools to support independent practice. So now, at this point in the instruction, if my students were synchronous, I would probably dismiss them, and then everything at this point going forward would be asynchronous. And so that would allow for the students that are in person to do lots of things with the physical manipulatives, to do experiments, paper assignments, worksheets, graphic organizers, and then online, now they're working independently online to show what they know. And a lot of times, like I said, choice boards were the way to go. Seesaw interactive activities, doing things like the scratch-offs or the spotlight tool or step-by-step instructions, those could work really well too for interactive activities on Seesaw. In grades 4 and 5, very similar in-person opportunities, and then online, same sorts of things that we talked about in Seesaw, just put into Schoology. You'll notice in the pink, we added in a lot of opportunities for creativity. This is just a wonderful place for students to just get creative and show what they know in meaningful ways. And I want you to notice on the choice boards again, we called out that some of that learning could be done offline at home. Just because they're at home doesn't mean they always have to be doing everything online. There might be something that they're doing at home that's project-based or inquiry-driven that they're bringing back in on their next day when they come into the classroom to share in a small group discussion. One of the practices that could be very beneficial in setting up, which in elementary, I feel like it's the world we live in, is station rotation. So thinking of, now that I've got 10 to 15 students in my classroom, what are going to be some purposeful and meaningful stations for me to set up so that I have guided practice, independent practice, and feedback all happening at the same time. So maybe at my teacher-led station, that's that opportunity for me to get in and do some guided practice with students who maybe need some interventions or extensions. And then other stations that are set up for maybe collaborative partner work or independent work on various activities or projects. All right, the last component of the lesson is our closure. Again, our synchronous students have logged off at this point, and so we're just focusing on the students that we have here in person as a way to just gain a better understanding of where are we today and where do we need to go tomorrow. So what might be some types of formative assessments that we could put in as an exit ticket at the end of our lesson. So before I hand you over to Karen, I'd like to share some hopes and hints for synchronous learning. What are some hopes that we have? Well, we hope that students still have equitable access to grade level content and standards. We hope that students still have opportunities to collaborate with their peers and their teachers. And we hope that students and teachers will really work to build that classroom culture that is supportive and welcoming, that keeps us all reaching towards our academic goals and growth. Some hints. When using tools to leverage in-person and online participation and engagement, try choosing tools that can function for multiple purposes. Seesaw, Schoology, and WebEx are going to be great places to start. Nearpod could be in there too. Students meeting online should not be expected to be engaged in synchronous learning the entire time. That's where asynchronous learning strategies can be leveraged. So being very mindful of when I have my students synchronously, why do I have them there, and is that the best use? Capitalize on the in-person time with students to build habits and knowledge for navigating the tools so that when they are at home online, they can be more successful. So in these first couple of weeks, really spending time helping to teach them the tools and how to navigate them so that they can be successful. And last but not least, go slow and be kind to yourself. These are a lot of options and recommendations, and there are many more that aren't on here. So choose one, choose two, and start there. Karen Smith is coming up next, and she is going to walk you through the lesson components as well as how do these tools and structures that I just went over fit into a second grade Ready Gen language arts lesson. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Karen Smith, Elementary Language Arts Coordinator here in St. Vrain. In the previous video, Temple shared with you tools and resources to support the blended and synchronous approach to instruction. In this video, we're going to explore how those tools can be intentionally embedded into a lesson plan to support instruction and student engagement in both a face-to-face and synchronous environment. Our goal in this process is to provide a structure for designing and delivering instruction to all students in a way that supports student learning and maximizes on student engagement in both the face-to-face and the synchronous learning environment. To support us in meeting this goal, we've developed a lesson plan template to support planning and delivery of instruction. The purpose of the template is threefold. The first is that we want to highlight the essential evidence-based outcomes of a lesson that lead to results in student learning. We want to maximize the instructional minutes that we do have with our students. Therefore, efficiency is going to be key. To ensure efficiency, we've identified the essentials within a lesson. The second purpose of the lesson plan template is to provide a crosswalk between those lesson components and our instructional program, so that whether students are engaging in a face-to-face environment or a synchronous one, all students are receiving a similar learning experience that leverages our evidence-based core instructional programs. The third purpose of the lesson plan template is to provide options for instructional tools in both the face-to-face environment as well as the synchronous environment within each of those lesson components, so that again, students can experience and engage in tasks that lead to the same learning outcomes. In the previous video, Temple walked you through tools that support various stages of a lesson. We are now going to invite you to think about how those tools might fit into a lesson plan. The lesson plan that we have used to support this process follows the Madeline Hunter approach to lesson design and delivery. Here, we've pinpointed again those essential components that yield success of learning outcomes. Before we jump into the components of the lesson plan, it's important for us to remember that while the template may be broken into designated specific parts, we know that good teaching requires that we navigate between the support functions involved in teaching. For example, we provide direct instruction, and then we model, and then we engage students in the gradual release process through guided practice, and then we might need to model again and provide more direct instruction based on what we're seeing with our students. So keep in mind that it's perfectly acceptable and reasonable to be navigating between the components of the lesson plan with fluidity and flexibility based on the needs of our students, as well as the nature of the lesson that we are teaching. So with that, we're going to go ahead and dive into the structure and framework of that lesson plan. So again, we always start with our lesson with the overall learning objectives driven by the question of what do we want our students to know, understand, and be able to do. We then move to the anticipatory set and retrieval practice of the lesson. Here we are really guided by the following question: how will I hook all of my students, whether they're in person or face-to-face, into my lesson in a way that activates their prior learning as well as elicits curiosity about where they're headed today? Essentially, we want to reconnect our students with the learning progression for the unit and anchor today's lesson within the larger context to establish a purpose for today's learning. We want to ask our students, where have we been in our learning? Where are we going? And how will today's lesson help us get there? The next stage of the lesson plan template is the input, modeling, and direct instruction stage. This stage is actually guided by two overarching questions. The first is, how am I going to design and deliver instruction so that all of my students can access new information and new learning? And the second question is, how will I design and deliver instruction so that all of my students have opportunities to both engage and make meaningful and personal connections with that new information? We then move to the next stage of our lesson, which is the checking for understanding stage. This stage is guided by the following question: how will I design and deliver instruction so that all of my students can demonstrate their levels of understanding? I want to ask myself, are students making progress towards that desired learning outcome, and how do I know? Here, I want to identify tools that will help me determine with as much objectivity as possible whether my students have got it before I move them on to the guided practice stage. And this applies to both my face-to-face students as well as my students who are engaging synchronously. Then I move to the guided practice stage of my lesson. Here, I'm considering the following question: how will I design and deliver instruction so that all students have unique opportunities to apply, practice, and share new learning while getting meaningful feedback? This then moves us into the independent practice stage of the lesson. How will I design and deliver instruction so that all of my students can continue to practice and refine their learning based on feedback? And then we move into the closure stage of the lesson, where I'm considering the following question. How will I close my lesson and create formative assessment structures that will gather information on both individual as well as collective progress towards those desired learning outcomes? So it is important for us to note that teachers are going to need to navigate and adapt this lesson plan based on the developmental level of their students. So for example, instruction for our kindergarten students who are engaging synchronously, for those students, teachers might have or might choose to have those students participate synchronously in the direct instruction and modeling stage of the lesson using the WebEx app on their iPad at home. And then the teacher might choose to have students log off after direct instruction and modeling and continue their learning in the activities and additional instructional videos in Seesaw. On the other hand, for our older students who might have more capacity and experience in the online learning format, those students might be able to toggle between the synchronous WebEx meeting and either Seesaw or Schoology. So these students might be able to stay and continue on with the lesson in the synchronous environment through the guided and independent practice phase of the lesson. So be thinking about this as you determine when you want your synchronous learners to log off of the WebEx meeting and turn to Seesaw or Schoology for a continuation of the learning. Before we move into a sample of what this lesson plan can look like, I want to give you some processing time to consider the following question. Think about the developmental level of your incoming students this fall. Think about which components of the lesson template that I just shared will be critical for your online students to engage in synchronously. If my students are engaging synchronously, which parts of that lesson are going to be critical, and where do I want to invite them to log off of that synchronous environment and extend their learning and continue their learning in Seesaw and Schoology? So I'm going to give you 2 minutes for a think, pair, share to consider the following question. So now that you've had a chance to process where you might engage your students synchronously and where you might invite your students to continue their learning in Seesaw or Schoology, we're going to go ahead and take a look at a sample lesson plan. This lesson plan, as you'll see, it's going to be a convergence of all of the things that we've talked about thus far, pulling together the lesson plan template as well as the tools that Temple discussed. Keep in mind that this format is content agnostic, meaning that it's going to support lesson design and delivery in any of the elementary content areas. For the purpose of this training, we're going to use a grade 2 reading lesson from ReadyGen. What you'll see is an overlay of the lesson plan template onto a ReadyGen lesson, integrating those instructional tools that support both in-person and online learning. So with that, let's go ahead and dive into the sample lesson plan. At first glance, what you're going to see is an anchor indicating which lesson this comes from in your instructional program, as well as the evidence outcome for the lesson, which is essentially your learning objective. This is coming directly from both your module plan, your district module plan, as well as the lesson objective on the first page of each ReadyGen lesson, or each page of the first page of each Envision math lesson. The focus of the lesson will be on moving students towards success of this particular skill. Here, we're going to begin synchronous instruction with our students, and we're going to start that with the retrieval practice and anticipatory set stage of the lesson. Here, we are accessing the component of the instructional program that sets up the learning for students. Once the lesson and objectives are introduced, teachers can then provide instructions to both the face-to-face and synchronous learners as to how they might activate their prior learning. So if you take a look at this sample lesson plan, we've invited students to think of a character from a favorite story that they've read, and our activator is just going to be a thumbs up and thumbs down in response to the questions that are prompted there. We then move into the input, modeling, and direct instruction stage of the lesson. Here for ReadyGen, that's going to be the explore the text phase of the lesson. So again, we have provided some explicit guidance as to where in the instructional program this is coming from. And then we've also provided a recommendation for how teachers can engage students in the read aloud stage of explore the text. So here we're recommending that teachers consider using the document camera feature while reading aloud to provide explicit modeling of the reading process. For example, word identification and syntax strategies. Again, be thinking about what you would do in a face-to-face environment when you've got all of your students in class with you, and then how you might layer in some of those synchronous and online tools to support those students who are learning and engaging at home. So again, as you'll see, we do the read aloud, and then we've got suggestions for our in-person learners and our online learners. And you'll see they parallel, they are pretty well matched. So for both our in-person learners and our online learners, the students are gonna follow along in their books. And then we've got some recommendations for vocabulary instruction for our face-to-face students, paralleled with vocabulary tasks for our students who are engaging synchronously. So, for example, in this sample lesson plan, during reading strategy for vocabulary, we're asking students to record words that are new or unfamiliar on a Post-it note or in their writing journal or in Seesaw. For our students who are learning synchronously at home, we're asking students to record those words on a piece of paper. And after the synchronous portion of the lesson, they can take a picture of that list and upload it to Seesaw. We've also got recommendations for engaging our face-to-face students in comprehension tasks, paralleled with how we might engage our students who are engaging synchronously in comprehension tasks at home. As Temple mentioned, there are also opportunities to engage, to leverage tools, technology tools that would support both our in-person learners and our face-to-face, our synchronous learners. So here we've suggested that teachers pull in an interactive text if that suits their needs. Then we move to the modeling and checking for understanding stage of the lesson. For a reading lesson using ReadyGen, this is your benchmark vocabulary stage and your close reading stage. Again, we've got explicit guidance from our instructional resource on how we can teach those phases of the lesson. And then, as you'll see, options for our in-person learners and options for our online learners. And notice that both of these environments really leverage cooperative learning structures, because we know that cooperative learning structures really is a tool that engages students in a variety of platforms. This stage of the lesson also provides an opportunity for extension by pulling in an added technology tool that can be used in the in-person environment as well as the online environment. We then move to the modeling and guided practice stage of the lesson. Here for ReadyGen, this is going to be the reading analysis graphic organizer. And this is essentially the skill that we want to move students towards independence with, which is embedded in our desired learning outcome. It's important for a few things to happen during this guided practice stage. First of all, students will need to have seen or heard the thinking of the teacher as he or she models the process for creating the graphic organizer. Students will need to practice the task on their own. And what is key here is that the teacher has student work to review, which is why it's critical that our online students have opportunities to show their practice and application, whether it's synchronously or whether it's just using the Seesaw or Schoology environment to do that. We then move to the independent practice stage of the lesson. For this sample lesson, this is the writing in response to reading phase. So I'm going to engage my students in the following writing response. And for my in-person learners, I can have them complete that writing task in their journal or in Seesaw. And for my online learners, again, I can have them do the same. They can complete the writing task in Seesaw or in a writing journal and have them do an audio recording in Seesaw of that response. I also have the option for this particular group of students of having them bring this response back to class tomorrow, where they can share that their response with their classmates in the in-person environment. At this point, I can end my synchronous instruction. Once I've given instructions to my students on independent practice, I can invite my students who are engaging synchronously to log off and work independently through Seesaw. Then I'm going to go ahead and close my lesson, where I'm providing tools for wrapping up a lesson in a way that builds continuity among the lessons within the unit. So that was just a quick overview of how we can merge both the instructional tools with a lesson plan template that maximizes our instructional minutes using our core instructional program. So a couple of things that I want us to consider and some final thoughts before taking this learning away. So the first thought is it's going to be critical and a priority to establish your system of communication with families. That will take precedence over all of these other components, because we're going to want to be interacting and communicating with our families and seeing what's working for families and what's not working and how we might adapt. The second is it's going to be really important that we take the first few days to play with the structures and the tools and the lesson flow with low stakes lessons and content. Really, we want to establish the process and the protocol, build familiarity, build some positive learning habits before we layer on our grade level expectations. The next consideration is go slow in establishing your classroom norms and your classroom culture within this new learning environment. It's really important that we're building comfort and safety for not only our students, but also yourself. And the next is really take some time to leverage your in-person time with students to build their skill set and capacity in navigating the technology, so that when they are at home, they are more successful engaging independently. So good luck. Please let us know if you have any questions and reach out to your colleagues for collaboration within this new system.
All right, guys, there's a lot going on in your head right now. You've learned a lot. But you know, when you think about it, go back to the chunks of the lesson, all right? You've been teaching and you understand the basics. You got your anticipatory set. You have your direct instruction, your guided practice, your independent practice, and your closure. Any one of those chunks can be brought together in a dynamic lesson plan when you're bringing parts of your classes together, providing asynchronous or synchronous instruction. We know that you have a heart for each and every one of the kids in your classroom, and let that heart lead. You're gonna do great. You're gonna have some time now to really think about your lessons and how you're gonna plan them for the start of school. And you're gonna have some time to collaborate with your colleagues so you can calibrate your implementation of your lessons with your entire school. Thank you so much for going forward and doing this amazing work. We believe in you and we thank you.